Thanks for inviting me. This is very exciting for me to be invited to give one of these presentations. I enjoy talking, and I'm frankly stunned to discover I have a cult following. This is awesome, and I'm immediately going to go out and put it in my email signature so everybody knows that I have a cult following. This is very exciting. So I teach here at the university. I teach international relations. And I research in the area of gender and security. So my main research focus is on the United Nations Security Council and its Women, Peace and Security agenda. I'm not going to talk specifically about that in this presentation, but it underlies really my engagement with these ideas. And see, the Women, Peace and Security agenda at the Security Council is the product, essentially, of feminist activism in New York and around the world. And it really was the brainchild, if you like, of some incredibly smart women, insisting that the Security Council, which was this bastion of kind of prestige and privilege and masculine power, demand that it recognize the ways in which gender matters to global politics. And it really was testament to their efforts and activism and engagement and persistence and pressure that got the Women, Peace and Security agenda off the ground. And that was back in 2000, and we're now looking at a year of women, peace and security activity at the Security Council, which is very exciting. So I'm happy to talk more about that in the Q&A session at the end. For now, I'm going to talk not so much about the Women, Peace and Security agenda, but what it means when I say that this was a really pivotal moment in the implementation of a particular understanding of why gender matters in global politics. I'm going to talk a bit about what I think that might mean. So, as was mentioned, I lecture on international relations, and being a proud feminist, I approach this topic from a feminist perspective, and I have a lecture, in my series of lectures where I talk about what gender matters in global politics means and what it means to take a feminist perspective. And I'm always asked during that lecture at some point, how would I define feminism? And I always refuse to answer, partly because I like to be annoying, but also partly because there is no one answer, right? We know that we cannot say a feminist is this and then sum that up in some neat little sentence and put a dot at the end and go home. So I prefer to talk about what feminism does. And for me, what feminism does is to allow us to pay attention to gender. And for me, what that means is to investigate the work that gender does in our understanding of the world, right? And I'm going to talk a little bit now about why I think that's so important. So I start from the premise that gender functions in a particular way in how we apprehend the world, how we encounter the world, how we engage with the world. And that is both conscious and unconscious, right? There are ways in which we may be conscious about how gender matters when we are deciding, for example, who we choose to sleep with. But there are ways in which we may not be conscious that gender matters, right? But one of the things that I think is foundational to feminist insights about global politics is the fact that gender matters. Now, gender, as a society, we are obsessed with gender, right? When I give this lecture to my first years, and you will have sat through this, Billy, if you were in my class, when I give this lecture, I always ask everybody, please raise your hands if you have a theory of gender. Right? And there's usually one or two brave souls out of 500 that raise their hands, and everybody else sits there looking at me like I'm slightly mad, which I get a lot. Everybody has a theory of gender, right? Everybody has an understanding of how the shape of your body orders your behavior in the world. And the way that I get everybody to understand this is to show them pictures that you would find more usually on the front of toilet doors, right? You're out in a restaurant, you want to wash your hands before you eat, you are confronted with two doors, right, bearing these images on the front here. If you know which of those doors you would go through, then you have an understanding of how the shape of your body orders your behavior in the world. You may never have thought about it in those terms, but you know which door you would go through and under what circumstances, right? And you know that it is generally not okay to go through the other door. These images might not bear any relation to the way that you look today or any other day. Most Women in the room, I would imagine, don't wear pointy skirts like this. I personally look more like the other shadow, right? But I know that I'm not going to go through that door because I have internalized those norms about how the shape of my body orders my behavior in the world. As a society, like I said, we are obsessed with gender and how the shape of your body organizes the way that you behave. We are obsessed with dividing human bodies into two categories, right? Humans come in two flavors, M and F, yeah? And only until very recently was that ever up for discussion, yeah? So back along a few years ago, probably prior to your remembering, which makes me feel old, Facebook had a campaign, right? Facebook needs more than 2 gender options. And then Australia recently voted that it was okay to have more than 2 gender options. And increasingly we're seeing more than 2 gender options on our toilet doors. But mostly, right, the assumption remains that humans come in 2 flavors, yeah? And we are obsessed with knowing and categorizing and behaving accordingly, right, to those categories that we have in our heads. When I was pregnant with my son, complete strangers randomly obsessed with the gender of my fetus, right? People come up to me, I'm standing at a bus stop, complete stranger saying to me, "What are you having?" And me going, "Well, a human, I hope," right? I'm fairly sure it's not a crocodile. Beyond that, I'm not sure. And what business is it of yours, you know? We are really concerned in society with deciding on people's genders, of making sure that people perform appropriately, right, in keeping with the ideas and assumptions that we have about the way that this shape of body should act. Which brings me back around to the question of how gender matters in global politics, right? Because it is not only about the shape of your body. It is not only about whether you are an M or an F, which door you go through when you want to wash your hands. Because in those categories, a whole other set of associative chains exist. We have assumptions about the kind of behaviors that flow if we identify with one type of body or another, right? We have a series of ideas about what it means to be a man in contemporary Australian society, right? They may be similar to or different from what it means to be a man in contemporary British society or American society or Rwandan society. But each society has a package of ideas and ideals around behavior that are associated with the shape of their bodies. This has an impact on global politics because global politics is essentially practiced, studied, performed by people, and people inhabit gendered bodies. Those ideas and assumptions that we have about what it means to be a man, what a woman can and cannot do, should and shouldn't do, those assumptions don't only inform our everyday practice, they don't only inform whether we decide to come to uni dressed in a skirt or wearing lipstick or wearing high heels or where we choose to eat and what sports we play, what we study and who we sleep with. They don't only inform our interpersonal interactions, they inform our political practices. If we assume that associated with masculinity, historically, for example, there have been certain ideas about rationality and detachment and authority, then we can see quite clearly how gender in global politics has a significant impact on what it means to be a figure of authority, what it means to be legitimate and authoritative and to be conceived of as a political player. So most often, right, if we are asked who is seen as a figure of authority, who is seen as a legitimate actor, who should be present at a decision-making table, at a peace negotiation, at the writing of a presidential statement of the Security Council, most often, unreflectively, we would respond, well, whoever is best qualified. And what a feminist analysis allows us to do is to unpick that question of qualification and to investigate the ways in which implicit assumptions about gender predetermine our own idea of who is and who is not qualified, who does and who does not have the opportunities for that political engagement. Now, there is an often misattributed quote from a British suffragist who said that feminism is the radical notion that women are people, right? And I think that's pretty awesome. Feminism helps me understand, however, that gender is a critical category of analysis when we're seeking to understand the world that we live in, and even perhaps to change it. I'm done.